If it's a Sunday, I find it's pretty easy for people to start Monday and be like, hey, I got my meal prep. Like, I don't want to do this again. Let's start over. But when it's a day where it's like a Friday, it's very easy from that Friday to turn to Saturday and Saturday to turn to Sunday. So, like,
The first question out of the mailbag is, do you have any tips for what to do after a day where I went over my calories and I cheated on my diet?
So this is a great question, and I find we get asked it quite often in different ways, shapes, and forms. So if you haven't listened to our past Thursday episode, we go very in depth on like how to get back on track after a week away, a weekend away. I know for a fact that you'll be able to learn a lot from that episode. But basically, this question is just like a one-off thing, one day and maybe even one weekend. This is something that holds a lot of people back because you can either take this experience and learn from it and become better, or you can take it and spiral off and start to beat yourself up, do bad things, maybe even stop your fitness journey because you feel like you failed. You may check the scale and you've gained a few pounds. Trust me, I've seen it happen over again, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that one bad day. So here's what not to do. First of all, you want to avoid beating yourself up. You want to avoid that self-negative talk and just destroying yourself, right? Like I said, this happens very, very often. Number two is you want to avoid just going in and trying to make up for it. So this is something that actually a lot of people do. I'd say probably the most common thing is people end up doing tons of endless cardio. They say, hey, Sunday I went over, I was at a bachelor party and I had more calories, or I went to a buffet or a wedding. I'm going to do 2 hours of cardio, or I'm going to do 2 workouts to make up for it. You want to avoid doing this because it instills negative habits where subconsciously you start to think, when I make a mistake, when I go over, I'm going to make up for it, and that's what I'm going to do. I know this because I used to do this. When I used to get ready for a physique competition, I remember there'd be days where I would binge on a couple different things, and the next day I would have a lot of negative habits, and it became a habit from that is that when I would go over calories, I would start to try to make up for it instead of doing what I should actually be doing. And the last thing is you want to avoid starving yourself. So once again, a lot of people, when they go overboard on a specific day, the next day they say, hey, I'm going to bring my calories down to nothing. I'm going to have 0 calories, or I'm going to have half the calories. Once again, these are just very negative habits. You end up having a negative relationship with food. So you want to avoid doing this. But now that we know what not to do, once again, sit down with yourself, reflect, ask yourself, where can I improve? Where did I go wrong? And just get back on track. It's that simple, and that's going to be my biggest takeaway. It doesn't have to be this complicated process where you end up doing a million different things. Just learn from it, sit down, ask why it happened, and I promise you that will be the best plan of attack from my personal opinion.
Yeah, great tips there from Kyle and everything. I absolutely agree with. And I think it just needs to be one of these things where you break a cycle. If it happens every blue moon, I mean, that's life, right? You can't expect to be always perfect, and you need to understand and work with it. But I think the best thing you can do above all else is reflect. So as silly as it sounds, whipping out a journal or even just spending some time alone in a thought, maybe on a walk, and say like, what went wrong? Why did I do that? Was I bored? Was I just bored at home and I just let loose, and I shouldn't have chips at home anyways, and I had chips and I ate these cookies I had? Like, from there you could like have the positive thought, say, you know what, maybe I won't keep those things in my house. And it's not to say that you're not allowed to eat those things, but like putting a little bit of barrier of access for you can prevent a lot of this. Because if you want a cookie, you're like, okay, I'm going to go drive, I'm going to go buy it, or I'm just going to buy a small bag of chips or whatever. And most times you're like, I don't want to drive, it's too far, it's not worth it. So when you can kind of have that reflect, you can start to create better solutions going forward, and you'll find what really works best for you. Everyone's so different. Like, some people have no issues having stuff around. For me, like, I don't even like having that temptation. If you're that kind of person that'll go like cabinet or fridge surfing, or if you do notice you're bored, it's like, how can I instead channel that energy to be better? Or maybe you didn't track, so you just ended up accidentally eating too much. That can happen as well. And when you logged everything in, you're like, oh shoot, I was 1,000 over. And instead, the solution there is quite easy, right? You'll just start pre-logging, or best as you can guesstimating, because then you can limit those portions. So taking a few seconds to actually actively reflect, or even like workshop what you would do differently in those situations going forward, is amazing. You know, you could really focus and say, maybe I don't need an app and a dessert, but I'm really going to love my burger and fries because that's something I enjoy. I'll get that tracked in my fitness pal and I'll build my day around it. So I think all in all, it's just like, it can be such a great opportunity to learn, and to be naive to expect that you'll never have a bad day again is just unrealistic to me. And actually something I have in my thoughts that I'll jump ahead from I love the concept of no big misses. So instead of like really reframing it that you need to be perfect, as I said, instead reframe it that you won't have any major misses. So maybe you'll go over by a little bit, but what will often happen is people will go over and they'll keep going over. They'll say the day's shot, I'm just going to do more damage. And this just isn't realistic. Like going to my financial example, if you're like, oh shoot, I spent a little bit more money this month, no one's going to say, you know what, I should spend the rest of the money and put myself further in debt. Whereas with food, oftentimes people will be like, oh, I'm a little bit over, whatever. I'm going to go over more tonight and then the weekend. And it becomes this chain, and it becomes like this chain reaction of just bad decision after bad decision. So instead, it's okay to have a little miss here and there, learn from it, grow one step backwards, two steps forwards, but really avoid these big, massive blowouts, if you will, and really learn to kind of limit things to where they are. And once again, that example, you can enjoy a great dinner, maybe say, I don't need the dessert. I intentionally went over my calories a couple hundred. I'm okay with that. That's a much better position than just to keep causing that damage. And we've actually made a reel previously where Kyle dropped his phone and then he picked it up and slammed it on the floor 2 more times. And it's so silly. No one would do that. But oftentimes this gets done with eating, where it's either like perfection, it's all or nothing. So the more you can remove that, and the more you can just say, hey, I had a bad day, I had some extra calories, I messed up, use that as extra fuel to have an extra hard, fun training session. You know, you got extra glycogen and energy in your system to go crush a killer workout, and just keep moving forward, get right back on track. I love Kyle's point too about removing the behavior of needing to make up for it, because I don't feel that's healthy as well. But I find reframing these things and reflecting is absolutely the best, because there's been situations I've struggled with, I've had the opportunity to analyze, and it became a lesson. And going forward, I was able to navigate them better. And that was just a tool in my toolbox. And that's something I'll continue to be able to workshop and get better with.
So well said. I'm glad Josh brought that up, because I didn't even mention like what not to do. Like I find that when it comes down to it, I do think that that's probably most people's actual biggest issue, is just the constant need to like continue to go overboard. And especially if it's a Sunday, I find it's pretty easy for people to start Monday and be like, hey, I got my meal prep, like I don't want to do this again, let's start over. But when it's a day where it's like a Friday, it's very easy from that Friday to turn to Saturday and Saturday to turn to Sunday. So like Josh said, avoid this, avoid missing twice, avoid big misses. But the other thing I wanted to add that I didn't talk about is just like, try to give yourself credit where credit's due, right? So it's not about being easy on yourself, but there will be scenarios where you may not be perfect. You might miss your protein. You might go overboard a bit, but in the past you would have done way worse. Or you saved a bunch of calories, which you never would have done before. And sure, you weren't perfect, but you said no to this, right? It's so easy to focus on the negative and every bad thing that you possibly did or whatever the case is. But at the same time, it's so easy to miss those positives. And I'm guilty of this. I know some of you are guilty of it, but let's say there's a specific wedding or someone's birthday and yeah, you weren't perfect. Yeah, you feel like you could have done better. You may be better off saying, you know what? I'm proud of myself for this. I wasn't perfect, but that simple recognition allows you to feel just better. And the next day you're like, hey, let's keep going. Whereas if you just dwell on it, you beat yourself up, like you may want to keep that negative habit going just because you feel bad about it all. So yeah, you got to start to reward yourself when it makes sense. If you go to 10,000 calories and you just binge eat and you go to buffets and you say whatever, you're not just going to be like, hey, I'm proud of myself, right? Like you got to learn from it. You got to reflect on it. But yeah, hopefully this makes sense. And that's the last thing I want to add for this amazing question.
Yeah, and you'll notice the more you stack good days on top of each other, how much easier it is to stick to that. And even if you get knocked off course just a little, it's a lot easier to do that. And I think the more you remove the compromise from your system, the easier it is just to be consistent. Like if you're like, it's non-negotiable, I'm going to hit my numbers, I'm going to knock down what I need to knock down. You do that often enough and it just becomes really easy, and you'll notice you'll have less issues with this. Whereas the more you entertain going over your calories, making excuses, it becomes very hard to break that cycle, truth be told. So if you're looking to pivot out of that and you're like, no, I really want to reach my goals, I'm hyper serious, you definitely do want to really minimize, if not remove, these extreme days where you end up eating a little bit more.